Okay, brilliant. So welcome to the Family Future Planner, which is all kind of leading us to a tool that I found incredibly powerful in terms of making a clearer plan for the family's future, what we want to do. But ultimately, there's plenty, whether you have a family or not, whether you build a plan for your family or not, there's the idea of this is that there should be plenty of ideas within this to get you thinking, even if you have no family at all. And the reason I think that this is an important topic is because the purpose of life is to build amazing memories. But the sooner you start building those amazing memories, the longer you get to keep them for. So the sooner we can create amazing things in our life, we can create those amazing memories, amazing experiences, and we can just enjoy them for longer. And I think we've actually touched on that specific concept at a workshop that we did in January, I think I recall. And we said, like if we're making an amazing memory for, let's say, our teenage child, they get to keep that memory for maybe 100 years. So that's incredibly powerful when it compounds up. So the sooner we can do more cool stuff, the better. The final thing before I start that I will say is when it comes to like, I'm definitely not going to stand here and try and preach about how you should be the best parent possible. I am definitely not classed as the best parent possible. I try, but I am not putting my hand up here and saying this is how it's done. I'm just trying to give you ideas so that you can come up with ways to make it better. This stuff is easier to coach than it is to actually do. But this is about coming up with new ideas. So I'm definitely not standing here saying I've mastered all of this stuff, but I think it's always about progress, not perfection. It's always about trying to improve what we're doing. And I want to start off with a story that I took from Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers. I don't know, has anyone read Outliers? You can just stick your hand up on the emoji thing if you want. Did anyone, Kenny, did you say you'd read? No, nobody's read Outliers that I can see. Brilliant book, really, really great book. And I love Malcolm Gladwell's style of, if you haven't read any of Malcolm Gladwell's books, I really would encourage you to read at least one. And Outliers is probably my favorite because he's got this brilliant way of telling amazing stories and then giving you a lesson from that story. And the opening story to Outliers is about the Roseto people, which is it would have been a community that was Italian, but this is actually based in a community that's in the US, and it's a little town of Rosetian people that have migrated from Italy to the USA, and they've congregated in this one town, and it's a beautiful little town. It's kind of a bit like Italy that's migrated, and a young American doctor happened to be staying in this community for a long period of time, and what he noticed was that the death rates of almost every kind of medical death, whether it be particularly heart disease, was almost non-existent in this community. And so he was fascinated by the fact that there was just no deaths from heart attacks, strokes, any of that sort of stuff in this community. So he was like, well, okay, maybe it must be that Mediterranean diet that they've brought over with them. And by the way, he looked at the geography of the area and said, well, actually, there's a town nearby that's very similar, but actually as a Germanic community, they had the national average of heart disease. There was another town that was, I can't remember what the other one was, but it was, again, a very similar sort of landscape and in the same area of the US. And again, national average heart disease. So he was like, well, geographically, it's nothing to do with that. Then he assumes, like I say, it's the Mediterranean diet that they've brought over. So he looked at that and he thought, it must be all the olive oil and actually, when he went back and looked more closely at what this community how they were living by the same Americanized versions as everyone else. They weren't sticking to olive oil. They'd gone to kind of the traditional vegetable oils that we'd use in the US. So actually the diet had very much changed in line with the US. So it wasn't diet related either. And eventually, after kind of really struggling with this concept of what was causing this, he drew on the fact that it was all based around the community. Because what they found was in this particular community, there was this unbelievable development or nurturing of different generations. So, for example, most houses in this community had 3 generations living in them. So the grandparents would stay living under the same roof as their children and their grandchildren. And that relationship of grandchildren spending time with grandparents was shown to give such a huge amount of benefit to their longevity and their health. But there was a whole load of other things. There was a lot of stuff that goes on in the community. I won't list them all out, but it's really worth reading out loud to understand it. Because actually, when I read this book, I was living on a farm that was about a mile outside of Seaton, the village. And it was partly reading this that made me think, actually, do you know what? I don't want to live out in this. I mean, it's a big old farmhouse. It was beautiful. But it made me think, actually, I really want to be back inside the village rather than out on a limb in this, this house that's in the middle of nowhere. And it really got me thinking about the power of being in a community and having people around you. And I think it's something that we need to think about. That community has much greater power than we realize. And in fact, you see that in all sorts of different ways. So, for example, breast cancer patients joining a recovery group double their chance of survival. Double. I mean, that's statistically enormous. You'd think that a bit of coaching and support from other people who are in a similar situation might help a little bit. But double your rate of survival because they joined a recovery group is absolutely insane. So that community piece is incredibly powerful. And in business, it kind of often goes against what we think, because sometimes we think, oh, actually, I can be more focused by doing this if I work in this way. But UPS actually found that this community piece was so important that they encourage their employee drivers to meet up for lunch. Because despite the horrible inefficiencies that causes of people driving to places that they didn't need to drive to, they know the employee improves their productivity and engagement as a result of the community that builds. So we really want to think about this from a personal point of view and a business point of view. How can we build this community? It's one of the reasons why I've launched the Hub and Spoke, because what I found was that, post-COVID, we all like this sort of flexibility of working from home, but actually we lost that community. It becomes very lonely working from home. So coming into an environment where other people are doing the same thing, we can build a really powerful community and make us all more effective and happier individuals as a result. In fact, sort of coming onto that, as a result of COVID, loneliness is one of the biggest threats to long-term health globally. The research now shows that loneliness has a massive impact on our long-term health. So I've talked in workshops before about the time system that was created by Strategic Coach Program, so free, focus, and buffer days. I'm not going to go through that again now, but some of you I know it very well from your Strategic Coach days. Others will get you playing catch up on our digital learning in due course. But one thing I am a strong believer in is what gets measured gets done. We measure what matters. So I've kept a track of how many free days I've had every year for the last 17 years. So I know that for the last 10 years, I have 45% or more of my days as free days. And that's 45% of my days that I can spend doing either stuff that's good for me, time with my family, all of those things that are actually really, really important. I was speaking to somebody that's interested in joining the trusted team yesterday, and he said, I just work every day. I love what I do, and I just work 24/7. But he had young children. Like, you're missing out. When you look back on your life, you're going to have missed out on so much quality time once they've flown the nest. We need to prioritize what's really important. I know I've talked about kind of balancing out, making sure that you have a minimum of a week, a quarter as a free day, and a minimum of 1 day a week as a free day. And a free day, for those that haven't heard it before, is a day where you don't check your emails, you don't do anything to do with work at all. But I really like the idea of having different types of free days and getting more specific on that. So I think every quarter you should have a really selfish free day, a day for just you to do something that you love, everyone else put aside. If that's you wanting to go cycle, you go cycle. If that's you wanting to play golf, that's you wanted to go and sit in a cinema on your own eating popcorn, that's fine too. I think you should also have a family free day at least once a quarter, and I'd expect it to be a lot more than that. But one really quality free day every quarter where you're having a really great experience together. And these things don't have to cost money. It could be we're going to take a picnic and we're going to go cycle around Rutland Water. I'm not sure my children would describe that as an amazing family free day, but I might think that. I think you should also have one as a couple. So we put aside at least one quality free day every quarter as a couple. And then finally, one as friends. So it might be that you need to start thinking about having, okay, every quarter I need to have at least one free day for me, for family, for the couple, and also for my friends. And if you start carving that out, you then have that forethought of, actually, okay, so if I am going to do that with my friends this quarter, what shall I do? Shall I buy the tickets to that gig that I wouldn't have got round to otherwise? Or shall I book the tea for this particular time so that we can do this? And there's a book called 4,000 Weeks, which I mentioned in a workshop forever ago. But it's really good at highlighting that we only get 4,000 weeks on this planet. 4,000 weeks isn't actually that many. So it's really important that we start sort of planning this stuff in advance to make sure we actually do the things that we want to do. And while we're on the sort of subject of family, I think one episode of the Business of Endurance podcast I'd really encourage you to listen to if you're a parent is the episode with Joe DeSena. So Joe DeSena talks about the importance of resilience. And I don't think there's been ever a time in history where building resilience into our teenagers and the 20-somethings, I don't think there's been a more important a time where that's been more important. And I think he actually summed it up really well in the podcast, which is, he said, when we were in kind of, let's say, the early 1900s, life was tough. You didn't have to teach your kids resilience. Life delivered them resilience training day in, day out. Whereas today, life isn't tough. And in fact, it's probably why Ironman, Spartan racing, Tough Mudders, 300-mile bike rides, swimming the channel, like Kenny's done, all of these things are actually so rewarding because we need things that test our resilience and grow our resilience in our life. And we do need this for our children as well. One of the stories in that podcast, which I still love, is the fact that Joe DeSena, when his children were about 4 and 6, I think 5 and 7, he employed a kung fu master to come over from China to live with them, so that every morning at 5 a.m. before his kids went to school, they got an hour's kung fu training, and then they got another hour when they came back from school, all about building resilience. So it's just a brilliant story. But I do think it's a topic that we need to think about, and I think there's so many more books and content coming out about resilience, because I think it's the main underlying reason why there's so many mental health issues in the younger generation today. And of course, we want to be building books into this. One of the things that we've talked about on many times, but also on the podcast, is the power of bringing books into the family. So one of the things that we always ask the people on the podcast what books you'd recommend. And interestingly, Steve Parry, the Olympic swimmer, said, "Well, I personally would pick out Rich Dad Poor Dad, not necessarily for everyone's listener, for the listeners of the podcast, but for the listeners' children." And I thought, well, that's a great piece of advice, isn't it? So, what books could we be feeding our children, encouraging our, bribing our children to read as they get to the right age? And, Rich Dad, Poor Dad was the one that Steve Parry picked out. I specifically wrote Smart Money with Charlotte's help for this younger generation to have, how to understand money, how to get your money working for you. Another book that falls into that same category that some of you will know is The Richest Man in Babylon. But we want to be thinking, well, okay, how can we kind of bring learning, but learning for real life situations? Because they get plenty of learning in school, but I don't know about you. I didn't know what a pension was when I left school. I didn't know what a credit card was when I left school. And yet that seems a whole lot more important to me than how to draw a circuit that makes a light bulb light up, when evidently I've never used that since. So if we go back to this whole free day and time conversation, it's really important that we carve out time for these amazing experiences, but it's also important to carve out time to plan this stuff. So when we started using the tool I'm going to share with you later on, we started saying, well, okay, a day a quarter, we're going to go out, as a minimum, we're going to go out and do something really cool together, find a nice experience. It doesn't have to be expensive, but we're going to go do something really nice together. But at the same time, we're going to go through our goals in the same way that I've been doing for years, from a business point of view and a personal point of view. We're going to do this from a family point of view. So it carves out a really quality day for Carol and I to get some clarity, but also it carves out time for us to say, right, what's important this, did we do what we said we were going to do last quarter? What are we going to do next quarter? What's important to us? And then obviously at the end of the year, we have a longer break in that allows us to plan the year's goals as well as the quarterly one. Yogi, I just recently watched a documentary that I put in Friday Footnotes, which is about Yogi Berra, who was a baseball player. I'm not really a baseball fan, but he said that you've got to be careful if you don't know where you're going, because you might not get there, which is like Yogi Berra just says the most ridiculous things, but actually they have a lot of sense within them. He also was the sayer of, I think his saying was, it's deja vu all over again. But I just got some really quirky Yogi Berra isms. But it's absolutely right. If you don't know where you're going, whether that's with your family or with your business, you might not get there, which kind of doesn't really make sense, but I'm sticking with Yogi Berra's version. So like I said, we plan a quarterly date day and planning day within that. This was a slightly extreme version that we did at the start of this year when we went on safari to a game reserve that's been on my bucket list for 23 years. As a guy in Botswana told me about Mala Mala back in 2001. And so it's the best game reserve on the planet for viewing leopards, and it is unbelievable. So we did this in January as our kind of annual trip away. And that brings me onto the bucket list, because I think when you've got a family, it's actually really important to have a split bucket list. So I already have my bucket list anyway, but there's a separate bucket list that is around the family. So let me give you two examples. If we want to go to Disneyland, we've done Disneyland Paris or whatever it's called when the kids were little. But if we wanted to go and do Disneyland in Florida, let's say, there is a window of opportunity to do that. Now, actually, at the top of my bucket list would be to go to Japan. I love the idea of going to Japan. I love the food, the culture, the scenery, the scuba diving. That just absolutely would be top of my bucket list. But whether I do that with my daughters or whether just Carol and I do that probably doesn't make that much difference. I mean, yes, we'd rather do it as a family, but actually, if Disney Florida is a top priority, then we've got a very different window of opportunity to do that as we have for doing Japan. So we kind of split out the bucket list and say, well, okay, this is the extended bucket list, but what have we got to do in the next 3 years that really, after that, is going to be far less effective? And I really like this idea of breaking it out and going, okay, well, this is the priority for the next 3 years. This is on the bucket list, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, it's actually like, I know Steve's done Ironman New Zealand. Ironman New Zealand is going to be really difficult for me to do while the girls are still at school. So I've kind of marked that as an Ironman I'll do beyond them being in school. And even better, while they're traveling, it might be if they're traveling around the world in a gap year, I can incorporate that into that. But it's not one for the next 3 years because the practicalities of it are just not right. I think it's also really important that we define our family values. We've done in a very early workshop work on defining our own values, but actually really defining what those family values are is really important, and sharing that as a family and kind of actually maybe even, and we plan to do this and we haven't done it, it's just occurred to me that we haven't done it, that creating a piece of art around those values that can stay in the home is a really lovely thing to do. But I think just really spending time as a family and kind of understanding what those values are, doing it collectively, not these will be your values, but doing it in the same way that we talked about building the company culture, working together to define those family values so that they own a piece of that. And then actually even better, having something visual that brings them back to it time and again is a really powerful process. And then finally, or one of the other things that I think is good is just to document what the family passions are. So for us, it's live music, it's scuba diving, it's safari, it's, because again, we can start to think about, okay, well, if that is the family passions, how can we bring that into what we're planning over the course of the next quarter? And then, in the same way as we create goals for us personally and for our businesses, I think it's really important that we create goals as a family, because again, we only achieve the things, or we're much better, much more likely to achieve the things that are important to us if we clearly document it and then set out a plan. And by writing these things down, it just means you're much more likely to do them. And so we've got a goal to climb Kilimanjaro as a family. In fact, Claire and I just earlier on this week interviewed a father and daughter for the podcast, and she was the youngest person to climb Kilimanjaro. She climbed Kilimanjaro when she was 15. I think that's her record. And so we were picking their brains on what it was like to climb Kilimanjaro, which, because of BBC documentaries, we think about the fact that is a, it's a safe big mountain to climb, but 10 people a year die on Kilimanjaro. So it is a big undertaking. But I think it would be an awesome experience. And we've had for a while that we want to spend a month in Africa and realistically, that means it's got to be over a summer. And within that month, we want to spend a week doing community work, perhaps working in a school or something along those lines. We want to spend a week climbing Kilimanjaro, a week sitting on a beach recovering, and a week probably doing something like a bit of safari or exploring or something like that. So I think that would be just such an incredible experience for the girls. I think it'd be awesome for the girls to achieve something like climbing Kilimanjaro. It would be humbling and really valuable for them to spend that time being a part of a community like a school and working on that. In fact, Fion did that in February this year with school and went out to Kenya, and it was just brilliant for her. So to be able to do that as a family would be amazing. But then to build in some bucket list type experiences at the same time would be fantastic. So documenting those goals is really important.